We're joined by Ryan Bolt, as Senior Middle East and North Africa Analyst at RAIN. Ryan, good to have you back on the show. So let's talk about this remarkable and fragile breakthrough. Still many challenges ahead. But what I'm gathering already is that some experts are saying, look, this is maybe the easier part. The true test of the agreement begins on day 16 when negotiations for phase 2 begin on ending the war permanently. I mean that's the key word, I guess. So how do you see things playing out in the weeks ahead, given that Hamas and Israel still have diametrically opposed goals when it comes to survival and destruction?
Well, certainly when we're assessing how far can they get into phase 2, I think phase 1, where they're pausing fighting, aid is moving in, and everyone looks like they're on a path towards de-escalation, serves the strategic and political purposes of both Hamas and the current Israeli government. But when they hit that phase 2, that's where the rubber is going to hit the geopolitical road, so to speak, because that's where those divergence of interest will start to play out. But I don't think after 15 months of such devastating war that either side is eager to transform this back into a full-scale conflict. I think instead it's more likely to shift into a potential repeat of what we're seeing in Lebanon, where Israel is able to act with more or less impunity against Hezbollah, but because of Hezbollah's diminished capabilities, they can't retaliate with a full-scale war. And Hamas will be in that same position in phase 2. But the key difference is Hamas has all the makings of a potentially very lethal and impactful insurgency, and the Israelis will have to manage their strategy knowing that Hamas can inflict real damage to their soldiers that will remain in the Gaza Strip.
Ryan, Biden was asked by a journalist whether it was his deal or Trump's. I mean, his reaction clearly suggested that he wasn't amused by that question. But in your view, who truly deserves credit for bringing this deal to fruition?
Well, I think the timing is almost certainly impacted by the coming of the Trump administration. That shifted Israeli politics. So when we look back to May of 2024, when Biden made a more or less a clear demand that he wanted the war to end after the Rafah offensive had wrapped up, it was the Israeli far right that was the main obstacle to engaging in some sort of ceasefire, even a temporary one at that point. But with Trump coming, the far right now believes that they will be able to trade a ceasefire in Gaza, and they believe they can keep it temporary in exchange for annexation and the expansion of settlements in the West Bank. And that is a core goal of the far right, of people like Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister and national security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. They want a greater Israel, and they want to start in the West Bank. And they believe by giving this concession to Trump and to Netanyahu on this ceasefire that they can be more likely to achieve it. But that being said, the strategic environment has changed dramatically over the past 15 months. And all of those changes, Hamas's degradation as a military force, the fall of Bashar al-Assad, the decimation of Hezbollah, all of that took place on Biden's watch, and in part because of the U.S. steadfast support for Israel. So in that sense, the Biden administration also deserves credit for bringing about this result.
Ryan, to your knowledge, who's going to be overseeing and monitoring, compliance as far as this deal is concerned? I mean, there have been previous, I suppose, agreements and ceasefires which are broken down because of allegations of transgressions, skirmishes, and so forth.
I don't think that there will be much of a formal mechanism of monitoring beyond the media. The Israelis will self-monitor. They will decide to take action when they see threats. And again, it'll probably look very similar to what we're seeing in Lebanon, which is also due to have its ceasefire extended. And that now looks more likely given the results of what just happened in Gaza. But that has not ended Israeli airstrikes on Hezbollah commanders. It hasn't resulted in Hezbollah completely abandoning positions or sticking by the stipulations of their own ceasefire. What we're seeing there is something of an unsteady, semi-frozen conflict that's unfolding over time. And that's probably what's going to happen in Gaza. Intermittent fighting, intermittent violence, but certainly nothing at the scale of what we have seen over the past 15 months.
And Ryan, if the ceasefire holds, could it mark the first major step towards lasting peace, or could this just fizzle out at just a temporary pause? I guess what I'm asking is, what will it take for both sides to move beyond the specific ceasefire agreement towards a more sustainable resolution to the conflict?
And unfortunately, this ceasefire, like many ceasefires in Gaza before, has all the embers of the next war. And without redressing Palestinian political status, either as an independent state or as citizens within a binational state, without some sort of redressment on that front, the next conflict, the next war is inevitable. And maybe it takes a few years, maybe it takes 5 or 10 years, but Palestinians being disenfranchised is the core cause of Israeli-Palestinian wars. And there's nothing in the ceasefire that seriously suggests that Israel and the Palestinians or Israel and Hamas are going to be putting themselves on a path to solve that problem.
Well, Ryan, just to be totally, totally optimistic here, if we do actually get to phase 3 of this agreement, we know that Anthony Blinken has a plan. Do you see the Trump administration accepting the basic principles of this plan, especially on the issue of statehood? I do recall that Donald Trump had, some semblance of a plan back in 2020, although it wasn't totally aligned with what the Palestinians wanted.
Yeah, and I think semblance of a plan does describe what the vision for 2020, the vision for peace looked like. It was a broad-based, mostly pro-Israel plan that would have given the Israelis the territory that they wanted in the West Bank while sealing off the Gaza Strip and treating it as something of a giant high-tech manufacturing center, pie in the sky kind of stuff that was going to be immediately rejected by the Palestinians. And that's going to be the continued conundrum, because at the core of this requires ideological reconciliation between two countries, two nationalities that have increasingly grown more and more right-wing, more far-right on the Israeli side, more far-right on the Palestinian side. I don't see that trajectory having changed through the Gaza war. In fact, radicalism has very likely deepened both within Gaza and the West Bank, even as we lack elections to be able to really tell how deep that radicalization has gone. That makes it very tricky for the Trump administration to stick by those goals. Now, of course, the Trump administration will welcome the broad contours of this deal, because essentially the Trump administration, like the Biden administration before it, more or less has the same interests in the region, which is energy, which is security, which is trade. And then the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict isn't necessarily something that they're all concerned about, as long as it doesn't affect those three core American interests. So if we get to phase 3, it means a status quo ante of basically September 2023. It seems to suggest that Hamas will once more take control of the Gaza Strip, that the Israelis will go back to managing and containing them, and that is the recipe for another war. Now, the most optimistic scenario in which there's some sort of international force running the Gaza Strip, that still isn't putting the Gaza Strip on the path to statehood. It leaves Palestinians disenfranchised, and that international force, whoever it might be made of Emiratis, Egyptians, Turks, etc., they could be then the subject of a Palestinian insurgency, as they will look like the occupiers and the collaborators with the Israelis, rather than looking like liberators.
All right, Ryan, we do have to leave it there. We thank you, as always. Appreciate you being on the show. That's Ryan Bohl, Senior Middle East and North Africa Analyst at RAIN.